Hello again from WJ Live. I'm Josh Manning, managing editor for the Western Journal. Joining me today are Michael Austin and Andrew Shasha, both staff writers for the Western Journal. At least I think that's what your titles are. Staff writers, reporters. We talked about this earlier.
Yes.
Folks, we're going to move quickly today. We've got a whole lot for you. Big stuff going on all over the place. Talk about voter fraud is everywhere right now. One of the challenges for the Western Journal as we seek to report on truth to you, not speculation, one of the challenges has been kind of teasing out what of these allegations are true, which of them aren't, or maybe said otherwise, which of them are clearly not true.
Yeah.
There's been a whole lot of misinformation floating around out there. And that has been a struggle for us as we've tried to sift through all of this and bring you all information that's true. And that's probably been frustrating to some readers over at the Western Journal. And it may have frustrated some of you guys who are watching us right now because we haven't hit any of these allegations really out of the park yet because we're still trying to figure out what's what. Well, good news, fellas. We've got lawsuits now. So lawsuits are being filed across the country. We have now gotten our hands on some of those. And I want to just read you some excerpts from some of the affidavits from people who have basically functioned as whistleblowers. These were poll watchers. These were people who were there to make sure that what the administrators counting the ballots, that what they were doing was right and that they abided by the rules. Yeah. And now we have case after case of people coming forward. And what I'm going to talk about specifically in Michigan, we're seeing other stuff, though, in Pennsylvania and other places. And also late breaking news, in case you have not seen it yet, the Decision Desk HQ has called North Carolina for President Trump. So that's a big deal, too. Without North Carolina, his path forward, I think, would be non-existent. So the path forward is still there, and a lot's going to depend on what happens with these lawsuits. So I want to read, if you folks will be patient with me, we've got, you can't see it because the white balance is off, but we have the actual suit filings here. And this is against the City of Detroit and the Detroit Election Commission and the Wayne County Board of Canvassers. And I'm going to read you just a summary of the allegations of fraud here, and then we're going to get into some specifics, some specific things that poll watchers said, and I want to get you guys to respond to them, because this may be the first, while you've heard about all these allegations of fraud floating around, this may be the first time you've ever heard them enumerated. So if you'll bear with me, I'm going to read for just a moment. The defendants systematically process. Now, when we talk about the defendants, we're talking about the election commission. We're talking about the guys who are counting, the guys who are accused of conducting fraud. The defendants systematically processed and counted ballots from voters whose name failed to appear in either the qualified voter file, that's who can vote, or in the supplemental sheets, that's who can vote but isn't in the other file. When a voter's name could not be found, the election worker assigned the ballot to a random name already in the QVF to a person who had not voted. So a ballot comes in, it's not identifiable, they take it. The allegation is that poll workers took it and assigned it to somebody who had not voted yet. So basically they just used someone else's vote to cast this vote. Defendants instructed election workers to not verify signatures on absentee ballots, to backdate absentee ballots, and to process such ballots regardless of their validity. After election officials announced the last absentee ballots had been received, another batch of unsecured and unsealed ballots without envelopes arrived in trays at the counting center. This is the only counting center in Wayne County, by the way. There were tens of thousands of these absentee ballots, and apparently every ballot was counted and attributed only to Democratic candidates. Again, we're reading from the lawsuit filed against the Election Commission in Detroit. Defendants instructed election workers to process ballots that appeared after the election deadline and to falsely report that those ballots had been received prior to the November 3rd, 2020 deadline. That's fraud. Defendants systematically used false information to process ballots, such as using incorrect or false birthdays. Many times the election workers inserted new names into the qualified voter file after the election and recorded these new voters as having a birth date of, you guessed it, 1/1/1900. We've seen January 1st, 1900 pop up for days and days. People trying to figure out why did so many people appear to have, so many 120-year-olds appear to have voted. Well, this would explain that.
Yeah.
And quickly, just a couple more. Unsecured ballots arrived at the counting center loading garage, not in sealed ballot boxes, and without any chain of custody and without envelopes. Defendant election officials and workers refused to record challenges to their process and removed challengers from the site if they politely voiced a challenge. After poll challengers started discovering the fraud taking place, defendant election officials and workers locked credentialed challengers out of the counting room so they could not observe the process, during which time tens of thousands of ballots were processed. Defendant election officials and workers allowed ballots to be duplicated by hand without allowing poll challengers to check if the duplication was accurate. In fact, election officials and workers repeatedly obstructed poll challengers from observing. Defendants permitted thousands of ballots to be filled out by hand and duplicated on site without oversight from poll challengers. Now, this actually gets comical as we go on, and I won't get into some of the nitty-gritty of this because I want to ask you guys some questions, but it actually gets to the point where poll challengers were trying to get a closer look at the books and the computer monitors and were told by the election officials they were too close because of COVID. So the challenger would back off a little bit, but wouldn't back all the way off. The official would then go get a supervisor to come in. The supervisor would tell the challenger, you got to back off. And in one case, the supervisor sat down about 3 feet away from the official and continued helping and told the other guy he had to be 6 feet away or farther. They ended up booting these, allegedly ended up booting these challengers and actually locking them out. And then, of course, that's when the cardboard and those things went up around the windows. So I want to just quickly do a little lightning round with you guys. I want to ask you, I'm going to read you specific instances of these, and I'm going to ask you what you think. These are from the affidavits. These are from poll challengers and people who are working the polls and their specific stories, and I just want to get your take on November 4th, remember this is the day after election.
Yep.
On November 4th, a City of Detroit election worker was instructed to improperly predate the absentee ballots receive date that were not in the QVF as if they had been received on or before November 3rd. She was told to alter the information in the voter file to falsely show that the absentee ballots had been received in time to be valid. She estimates that this was done to thousands of ballots. Is that concerning or not?
I think that's incredibly concerning, particularly because we have the fact that in most of these states, and I want to say all 50 states, we have a system by which late arriving ballots can be cured, whether you believe in that or not, that's up to you. But you can have these things verified. You can just count them separately and ensure that they are segregated from the typical ballots cast and await those results and essentially the responses from the folks who cast those ballots to see if they're valid and then add them to the totals later. And I think part of the rush to get this expedited and to ensure that all of these thousands and thousands of late ballots or mailed ballots, absentee ballots, whatever group these fall into, to get them counted on election night, the mess that this has caused, all the mail-in ballots, to rush and count them has actually resulted in not wanting to go through the proper channels to make sure that the count is valid.
Right, because why would you? If you've messed up, then it's in your incentive to keep things in the dark. What do you think, Michael?
Yeah, I mean, we need a deadline on when these votes come in, and it sucks if you've done everything right.
Well, there is one.
Yeah.
There is a deadline.
Well, that's apparently not for some of these people, I guess, is what I'm saying. But, a lot of people might think, well, some of these ballots, they just came in just barely a little bit late, so you should give them a break. But, if we keep pushing back on these restrictions, we're going to get to the point where, okay, one candidate's winning at the end of election night, then a bunch of other people put in their late ballots. All of a sudden it switches, and we just can't have that in a fair and safe election.
Let me ask you another one. At approximately, again, this is pulling from signed affidavits from people who were poll challengers. They were there watching, trying to make sure everything was legit. At approximately 4 a.m. on November 4th, again, election night was November 3rd, so we're into the next morning, wee hours of the morning. At approximately 4 a.m. on November 4th, tens of thousands of ballots were suddenly brought into the counting room through the back door. these ballots were brought to the counting center by vehicles with out-of-state license plates. It was observed that all these new ballots were cast for Joe Biden. If somebody said that to you, would you think, okay, this is an allegation of fraud. This probably needs to be looked into?
Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely, yeah. And, now that we're talking in the tens of thousands of ballots, this is the kind of stuff that swings the election for Trump. And we're seeing more and more cases where, look, we don't have definitive evidence or definitive proof that
Not yet.
a lot of this stuff happened.
Not yet. We have allegations, we have affidavits, we have people swearing that this is what happened.
It's starting to stack up. And if
it's not nothing. Yeah.
It's not nothing.
It's not. It's this. It's this. If you can't see, it's Exhibit A. It's Exhibit B. It's Exhibit C. It's Exhibit D. Now remember, all this time we're being told there are no legitimate allegations. It's Exhibit E.
Yeah.
Hey, look at this. There's an F. Exhibit F.
There's obviously evidence that something could be going on, and that we shouldn't be denigrating anyone that notices that.
Yes.
And wants to investigate it.
Yeah.
All right. Good answer. Another quick one. I'm going to give this to you, Andrew. Despite election rules that required that all absentee ballots be inputted into the system before 9 p.m. on election night, the election workers inputted all of these new ballots into the system and manually added each voter to the list after 9 p.m. Listen to this. The qualified voter form system can be accessed and edited by any election processor, that's any election employee who has credentials, with proper credentials in the state of Michigan at any time and from any location with internet access. This access permits anyone with the proper credentials to edit when ballots were sent, received, and processed, again, from any location with an internet connection. Am I the only one who's worried about that, who's disturbed? We have no idea who all has credentials. We have no idea where they were logged in from.
No, absolutely not. I think that's actually the one that, first of all, I'm most likely to believe of all the allegations. That's the one that I would say is the most likely of all realities. And that is the one that worries me the most, because that means that off-site folks who weren't working that day, that means that folks who haven't gone into work in weeks, who are on vacation or doing whatever it is, can go and backdate certain folks or add people to the rolls. Again, like you were saying, there's not only should there be a date by which things need to be received and a time by which they need to be received, you need to be registered to vote. It's not that challenging to file very quickly with your county and make sure that you are on the rolls to vote. And if you are a resident and a citizen with the most simple types of documentation, you can get your voter registration done. It's not very hard. A lot of our audience has done it. I am sure that they feel the exact same way. And so that is the one that scares me the most, because I'm not so much worried about things that happened on site at the moment of, because there are the poll watchers and there are those things are going to get raised. If I were an intelligent criminal, I would think to do something on the back end afterwards when no one's looking.
Well, and how do you not have a system that requires multiple people to sign off before someone's vote is changed? You just give somebody a set of credentials and they can go in and presumably do this on their own. Now, maybe there are a million different security checks in place. We're not hearing that that's the case. And sort of knowing government operations, I kind of doubt if that's the case. Did you quickly have one more thing you were wanting to say, or no?
It
looked like you were wanting to.
Requiring people, just another note, requiring people to get an ID to vote is not voter suppression. No. So
you have to have
have
an ID to get into the Democrat National Convention every 4 years. So it doesn't seem unreasonable. There's a great video we ought to go back and find it sometime. It's a video where somebody went into neighborhoods where voter suppression is frequently alleged, and asked, most of them were black voters, and asked them, do you know how to get a driver's license? Do you know how to get an ID?
DMV,
Do you need any help getting a driver's license or getting an ID? And they were offended. They were offended.
Yeah.
No, of course I know how to do this. I'm not an idiot. This idea that it's suppression is just ridiculous. So
PragerU video.
Was it a PragerU video?
Yeah.
Okay. So big stuff going on as far as potential election fraud goes, big stuff as far as recounts go and those things. Swinging over now, we've also got COVID news. We had info from Pfizer yesterday, and now, as predicted, we've got Democrats responding to the idea of maybe a 90% success rate with the vaccine. What's happening?
Yeah, so Pfizer announced the vaccine, 90% success rate. Everything's looking great. And then Governor Cuomo goes on ABC, talks to George Stephanopoulos, and he basically suggests that because Trump is the one executing the distribution plan, he and other governors need to get together and put a stop to it. So we got a clip to play for you from that interview. We'll play that real quick. And then
vaccine distribution in the next 2 months. What do you make of this news?
Well, it's good news, bad news, George. The good news is the Pfizer tests look good, and we'll have a vaccine shortly. The bad news is that it's about 2 months before Joe Biden takes over, and that means this administration is going to be implementing a vaccine plan. And the Trump administration is rolling out the vaccination plan, and I believe it's flawed. I believe it learns nothing from the past. They're basically going to have the private providers do it, and that's going to leave out all sorts of communities that were left out the first time when COVID ravaged them.
All right. So one of the concerns that Cuomo lays out is that he thinks that the implementation plan may have trouble getting the vaccine into lower income communities that don't have as many resources. Okay. On its own, that concern is completely valid if anyone brings it up. Okay. But if you look at what Joe Biden's plan was, I went to his website. I looked up what he says his plan is for reaching
You went to
those communities.
joe30330.com?
Yes,
Amazing.
I did.
Okay.
And all he says about for his COVID plan, all he says about reaching those communities is ensure everyone, not just the wealthy and well-connected, Marxist rhetoric, in America receives the protection and care that they deserve. Okay. No specific plan.
That's easy.
So
Just going to make sure
No
it happens.
specific plan.
All right.
Meanwhile, Trump, with his Operation Warp Speed, and this is per the what was this? Department of Health, and Operation Warp Speed is a partnership working together with the Department of Health and Human Services, the Department of Defense, private firms, federal agencies, and working with the military to distribute the vaccines, therapeutics, and all these other things to all kinds of different communities. So it's a pretty advanced plan that's going to reach a lot of communities, and there's no reason to suggest that it would not reach lower income communities either, especially given how much thought and effort is going into this. And, they're working, private industry and federal agencies are working together on this. And more than 100, and this is CDC Director Robert Redfield pointed out in this same article that more than 100 million doses will be delivered by January of 2021. Okay. And so if Cuomo gets what he wants, okay, and he ends up stopping the distribution, he would then leave it up to Biden and his administration to come up with a distribution plan. I mean, that would be, you're getting close to the end of January when they even start on that. So you have all those months that people could have been saved with this vaccine. And you're putting it off just to make a political point. What do you think that says about Cuomo? And kind of, this is not unfamiliar for other Democrats have made this point, and yet, so they're fighting against this vaccine because it's Trump's,
Right.
and yet they claim to be the party of science.
Right. So I think it's another case of orange man bad syndrome, Trump derangement syndrome.
Yeah.
If Trump's fingerprints are on it, then it's no good. You have to flush it. Doesn't matter if the baby's in there with the bathwater. Get rid of all of it. I think it's also typical sort of classist demagoguery. There's an old joke that if an asteroid were going to hit the world and wipe out all life, that the New York Times headline the day before would be "Asteroid to wipe out all life on Earth, women and children hit hardest." And that's what this sounds like, only with poor and underprivileged hit hardest. That's exactly what this sounds like. Now, to the extent that Cuomo, if he wants to make a federalism argument and say, look, states would be better at figuring out how to distribute these things, that's a fair thing to say. What I'm not sure is fair to say is that the vaccine plan is flawed and then not go on and explain precisely what those flaws are. And this leaves Democrats, again, in the uncomfortable position they end up with all the time. They end up in this position with war, too. For Democrats' talking points to be shown to be true, Americans have to hurt.
Yeah.
Dead people, dead American soldiers are good for Democrats. Unemployed minorities are good for Democrats.
Yep.
Unwed mothers are good for Democrats. All of these things that when you sort of step back and you look at from an academic perspective and with any kind of intellectual integrity, these are very bad things. Yet they always, because of the way the left positions itself, they always redound to the benefit of the left, because then Cuomo can turn around and say, see, I told you, people were going to die. People were going to die. Now people are dying. It's self-fulfilling.
I mean, I think even regardless of the details, I would actually go so far as to say that his concern about whether or not it will not go to certain like low-income communities or portions of the city or what have you is actually completely invalid. We heard throughout the entirety, and if it were discriminatory, absolutely a problem.
Right.
Obviously. Not going to even go there. That's not worth justifying. It's obvious. But we heard throughout the beginning of the pandemic in, February, March, April, that it didn't matter if the policies in New York City or in the state of New York were the best possible policies, the perfect world scenario. As long as they saved one life, it didn't matter.
Yeah.
Now we're talking about a vaccine that, as this report says, would hit a third of the country by the time that Biden took office.
Yep.
He would be starting with a tremendous head start. So if it would save one life, if it would save a third of Americans a little bit of trouble or a whole lot of trouble, wouldn't that be amazing, right?
Yeah. And another point of this that I almost forgot to mention is Cuomo says that one of the worst parts of Trump's plan is that it gets private industry involved. And he says that it should be more of a, big government solution. As I read from that,
Maybe the people who handle elections should handle administering the vaccine.
But basically what that would mean is, like I read all the agencies working together on this. There are government agencies working with private industry on this. All Cuomo would do is take out the private industries, the people that are best at innovation and reaching people. And so it's a disaster all the way through.
It's a funny thing. If you think back, gosh, what is it now, 14 years ago to Katrina, FEMA was kind of a joke in its response to Katrina. It was just disastrous. There were people with no food or water and no shelter and kayaking through next to alligators and these things. You got Sean Penn out there with a shotgun and it's just all kinds of terrible danger. And the federal government couldn't even get water there. What did happen, though, was that, if I remember correctly, it was bottled water companies, and I think even Anheuser-Busch got in on it too. And they were able to deliver enormous quantities of water. The private enterprise, private industry can mobilize and do things a lot faster than the federal government. The only way I can see that the feds might be useful in this is Trump has talked consistently about mobilizing the military, and they do know how to run logistics. They're not especially efficient, but they do know how to run logistics, and so there's maybe something to be said for that. But yeah, just nationalizing the entire thing, I don't know why in the world we would think that is somehow better. We're running out of time, though. So, Andrew, let's throw to you.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, what actually worries me even more about Cuomo's rhetoric there is the fact that he could probably do it. I mean, we have a problem of Democrats, because they love centralized government and they love centralizing power, they would be absolutely fantastic at pretty much hamstringing Donald Trump's plan to get the vaccine out. We see this in the election, how that played out, and with the kind of more broad political questions that we're answering in this country in the last few decades and that we'll continue to answer, is that Democrats are very good at whipping up support for things that they want in a way that Republicans simply are not. Now, a topic that we've discussed over the last couple months is the idea of court packing, ending the filibuster in the Senate. These are things that we've discussed mostly related to the confirmation of Justice Amy Coney Barrett in the last few months, that we've heard all about how the Democrats, in response to such an expedited process to move Barrett to the court, that they called that court packing on the Republican side. So they would, under a Biden administration, we've heard tell that there's at the very least going to be a commission to consider reforming the judiciary, whatever that means. It probably means that
we'll say we're going to think about packing the courts before
we're
pack
going
the
to do
courts.
it. Exactly. And we've also heard that if the Senate were to go to the Democrats, which is still a possibility, I don't think it's incredibly likely, but it is still possible with the 2 Georgia elections, that we may see Democrats also try to kill the filibuster, which is essentially the idea that you need 60 votes to close debate on any topic. That's incredible for making the Senate a deliberative body. Now, we saw one Democrat bold enough this week to come out against those plans in light of the idea that Biden might have won this election, that the establishment media has already said that he has won this election. Now, Joe Manchin from West Virginia, a Democrat, more moderate in most of his leanings, said the other day on Fox News with Bret Baier, and then reiterated on Twitter, it was yesterday evening, let me be clear, I will not vote to pack the courts, and I will not vote to end the filibuster. The U.S. Senate is the most deliberative body in the world. It was made so that we work together in a bipartisan way. If you get rid of the filibuster, there's no reason to have the Senate. Now, I would agree with that. I think that the Senate is a more deliberative body. There are 200 less bodies in the body, making it a far more deliberative process. Far more debate occurs there. Now, of course, the reaction was for Democrats to absolutely keelhaul him over it. Ilhan Omar, one of the squad members of the progressive freshman squad in the House, came out and wrote, "Stop worrying about progressives. This might be the reason we don't win Senate races in Georgia. Good grief," and then a facepalm emoji, because we have to be a little bit sassy, of course. Now, something that I find so interesting about this is that Democrats are absolutely overjoyed at all times to pile on when members of their caucus go against what the more generalized idea of things should be. We saw with, even in 2009, 2008, that Nancy Pelosi was excellent at whipping up votes for what the party wanted.
Yeah.
They are excellent at getting on message. Republicans are not so great at getting on or people right of center are not fantastic at getting on message. We saw this with the election. People who were more conservative were unwilling to come out for Trump because of his vulgarity, and that lost him some votes. We saw that libertarians were unwilling to come out for the right of center agenda because they weren't getting enough of what they wanted, so they went to third-party candidates who tremendously hurt the second place in most states in most elections. And we have, in the next election, if the Republicans don't fight for this president, we are going to see a lot of Trump supporters not come out for conservatives because they feel wronged.
Yeah.
So, Josh, what I want to ask you, you're the oldest among us on this episode here, so I figure, age before beauty, will ask you, why is it that throughout the last few decades, Republicans have had such a hard time getting on message and fighting the real enemy, or the real opposition is the other side? Why is that such a problem?
Gosh, I think there are probably a number of responses to that. One is that Republicans and conservatives in general were late to the narrative game. To some extent, we still haven't figured out narratives. There's virtually nothing redeeming about the left. There are some things redeeming about liberals. And one is that they do tend to be compassionate, and left to our own devices, a society full of nothing but hardcore conservatarian types might not be the most sympathetic to people who really have. The lottery of life has not worked out for them. The great thing is that in America, the lottery of life doesn't have the last say on things. But when you can talk about people who are experiencing tragic circumstances and have bad things happening, that's, we're empathetic creatures. And Americans, maybe most of all, we give an enormous amount to charity. We have saved, not to exaggerate, we've saved the world multiple times. We did in World War I, World War II, and then we really did with the post-war order and in the Cold War. So narratives really work, but conservatives haven't figured out really how to run those. And also, conservative narratives, I don't think, are necessarily as just kind of compelling when it comes to your heart. Talking about a sad child who doesn't have enough food at night, that resonates on one level. Talking about how the government got in the way and stopped the free market, and that's causing that child to be hungry. That's not nearly, that doesn't pull on the heartstrings nearly the same way. Nearly the same way. And then the other thing, the third thing maybe, is leftist control of the media. It's fine to say that we're not especially good messaging, because maybe we're not that great messaging, but we could have the best messaging system in the world, and all we control right now is AM radio and new media. And so that can make, you can have the best message in the world, but if you don't have any channels to get it out, it doesn't do you very much good.
Well, and when you're telling the truth, you're at a decided disadvantage to people that get to tell a lie that's crafted
And
and
just
like,
straight around
they
the
put
corners.
it together, has a perfect narrative, cohesive structure, but the truth remains constant no matter what. And sometimes those messages are hard to send. It's hard to know what variables are relevant to a certain problem. And so you're always at a disadvantage if you're telling the truth versus if you're crafting a narrative that's meant to further your agenda.
And then that last question that I want to forward you guys, I'll start with you, Michael, and then Josh, if you want to touch on it as well, is part of the inability to get the party kind of together to fight against the common enemy or the common opposition, is that right now, at least in Washington, part and parcel with all of the Trump hatred in the establishment? Is it an inability, is it a willingness, I guess, of the establishment politicians in Washington to say, well, maybe if we can just wash our hands of Trump right now, whether this election was fair or not, maybe if we can just kind of see him out the door and see a return to normalcy in Joe Biden, is that better? And then we can craft a new message in 2024.
That's definitely a big part of what's going on. I think another part is a lot of conservatives and Republican officials are just more scared of the left, because they will destroy your reputation, your life, everything if you step out of line. And so I think it's been a problem for a long time that conservatives haven't been able to really stand up to that. I think Trump started a new movement of people being able to say, well, screw that. I'm not a racist. I can stand up to this. But, we still have some work to do to get enough people brave enough to stand up against that rhetoric.
Can you give me the context of your question? I'm not 100% following.
So what I'm saying is essentially there are certain figures who, unfortunately, I would say that it's probably a result of cowardice, who on the Hill have not come out. Maybe they haven't congratulated Joe Biden, but maybe they haven't also come out and said, we need to really fight for this president
they're
in this
just
very
sitting
moment.
back waiting to see.
If maybe a domino falls in one
Yeah.
direction or the other, and they can come down on the right side of it. Is that what you're seeing?
I mean, cowardice isn't a new thing among the political class, I don't think. Maybe it's more surprising that as many people have come out supporting Trump as have. I mean, he's super controversial. The received knowledge, the accepted knowledge, seems to be that Trump's not going to get a second term. I don't think that's at all necessarily true at this point.
Yeah.
But if the guy's been kind of a headache, you've had to explain to reporters. I doubt if they had to explain to their constituents that often.
No.
But if you've had to explain to the media over and over again, if you've accepted their premises, maybe you're thinking, well, gosh, I can sit back and, life in the minority is not that bad. I get to object all the time. I'm not responsible for anything. There is an amount of cowardice involved. There's probably some convenience involved as well, and probably raw political calculation. One of the things that's so sad about this is Trump, for all of his foibles, he's basically sacrificed his life at this point.
Yeah.
I mean, the rest of Trump's life, now he's got enough money, he'll be able to get
berated
away
forever.
and not have to see people if he doesn't want to. But this is a guy who's gregarious. He likes being on the spot. That's over, man. I mean, if he loses, he may run again trying to keep that. But he's wrecked his life doing this, or he's allowed the left to wreck his life doing this. And if you're going to really affect change, sometimes I think you have to be ready for that. And most of the people on Capitol Hill, I don't think, are ready for that at all. They are in this playing a game. This is not statesmanship. This is feather your nest, make sure your kids can get some cool deals with Burisma or whatever. Gonna have a nice cushy lobbying job after this and all of that. And so wading into something like this that's a political can end up being a political civil war. That's probably not the most appealing thing to these sorts of people. I'm not sure, but yeah, it's not surprising to me. It's the nature of politics, and it becomes worse the less virtuous the people are, and that's part of what we're dealing with. And I think the less educated the public is, the worse this gets too, because they don't understand the importance of virtue. So, speaking of being educated, I hope that's one of the reasons you guys are here watching WJ Live. We bring the show to you. We're doing it daily now. We do come on. George always gets the date and gets the times wrong, so I'm going to read it. WJ Live is on every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern and at 2 p.m. Pacific. So join us here every weekday. I can when I can read it. 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific for WJ Live. Remember, it's powered by the Western Journal. We are interested in bringing you truth. I know folks from time to time have been frustrated. Why isn't Western hitting voter fraud as hard as we would like them to? Well, folks, we're weighing it out, trying to figure out what's true and what's not. And man, let me tell you, when it comes down to it, when we can find this much truth, these are the allegations. This is what the court's going to decide. Is this true? When we've got this kind of cold, hard stuff, we will bring it to you and hit it out of the park. To our audio listeners, be sure you go to youtube.com/WJ Live. You're going to click the subscribe button. I think that popped up on screen just a second ago. After you click the subscribe button, you're going to click the bell to be notified when a new podcast goes live. So, and finally, you can support real journalism. There are very few real journalists left out there, very few among the mainstream media especially. You can support the real journalism we do by becoming a subscriber. You can go to westernjournal.com/join, and you can join us in our fight to get the truth out there, to stand up against the establishment media, and to hold, not just to hold the left accountable, but to hold the political class accountable, to hold those who are trying to erode Western society and fundamentally change America, to hold those people accountable. I lied. Last thing, this is important too. We're seeing a mass exodus from Facebook. That can be described as nothing but a good thing. We are over at Parler. If you don't have Parler, go and sign up. And you can find us at the Western Journal on Parler, at the Western Journal. That's it for us, folks. Thanks for being with us. We appreciate it. We're going to see you tomorrow at 5 Eastern, 2 Pacific.
Yep.
I got it right. We'll see you then.
Hi, my name is Samantha, and I'm the community manager for the Western Journal. We've really enjoyed recording WJ Live these last few weeks, and we have some exciting news.
We are now on Apple Podcasts, but we need to ask you a favor.
In order to equip even more listeners with the truth and fight against big tech,
we need to get more subscribers and reviews.
So please, go find WJ Live on Apple Podcasts. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and leave a 5-star review. Oh, and tell them you want to see more of me on the podcast.
Thank you for helping us out. And don't forget that you can catch a new episode of WJ Live every Tuesday and Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific on YouTube and now Apple Podcasts.